artist, as well as a member of the North Carolina Writers Network. He is a UNC Chapel Hill journalism graduate. He has a particular interest in helping others use old and new technology to share family and life stories. His website is www.mindyourmemories, not mind, but mine as in or, yourmemories.com, and it deals with this topic. And then Bill Pfefferkorn. Bill has a name that many of you recognize. He's a Winston-Salem native who enjoys writing poems and memoirs about life in the city. He practiced law as his profession in the city and developed his writing interest through workshops up at Chautauqua, which all writers have heard of that famous program. He uses memory and research to craft prize-winning poems about life in Winston-Salem. So let's have a hand for everybody. Welcome. And so the way we're going to get started tonight, I want each of our panelists to take a couple minutes to talk about what you do, why you do it, and what impelled you to get started doing it. So we'll just start at the far end of the table and work our way back. You're the far end, Al.
Yeah, I'm the far end. I'm also the...
All right, Al, go ahead and hold it back up to you.
Also a historical artifact.
Not on.
I apologize. Can you hear me? Can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Turn off the microphone.
No.
I just need to just...
Can you hear me now? No. So I got to talk to the mic. Okay.
Put it up to your lips. There you go.
Better?
Yeah.
Better. Okay. Hold the mic up close.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. How did I get started on the subject of memoirs? I think mostly because I started to think about some of the reasons why I didn't write something myself. And one of the reasons is what faces a lot of people who write memoirs is that if you write them truthfully, you're going to piss off some people, really badly. And I decided I didn't want to make any more enemies than I had, and that was not a good reason. But I started teaching in workshops in South Carolina primarily. The subject of writing family and life stories is always fascinating. You've got a storehouse of stories in the background, my own family and so forth. But I found that people, in many cases, would come to me and say, well, I can't write. I'm not a writer. And so, we still have a problem with the sound. I'll try to get close to the mic. So what I tried to do was to convince people that you do not have to be a writer, quote unquote, to share your life stories. The technology we have today is incredible. You can record them. You know, you don't have to sit at a typewriter or take a quill or whatever and write it out. So I've had a lot of fun working with small groups and working in small workshops on that subject. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shirley.
Thank you. Well, this is my first endeavor, actually. I've always been in cultural African-American, promoting African-American culture. I used to work at the Arts Council in community outreach, and the goal was to make sure the arts got to underserved populations. Later in life, now I'm at Salem, and I'm in African American history, and all of this information is there about enslaved people in Winston or in Salem that I had no idea was there, and it's, I think it's immense, and people need to know about this. And as I'm there, I want to know more about these people that I've learned about, but there's nothing there other than we know that they went to church. I don't know anything about their social life, you know, what was important, what motivated them. So I took on this little undertaking through an easy way, a pictorial, with Arcadia. So you're limited to the number of words you can write anyway, so that was good for me. I can do photo captions, but I wanted to actually leave a deposit in the land for people, our children's children's children, so that they would have some idea of what people looked like, what clothes they wore, what socially was important to them, you know, how they, not who was the first doctor or the first lawyer, but who was doing the arts, who was doing African drumming, those simple kinds of things that to me make life important, that contribute to society. So that's how I got to doing this. It was easy, and I wanted to report something for future generations.
Thank you. I want to thank Al. He's the one that started the Memoir program here in Winston. And I think I'm one of the first people that got involved in Winston-Salem writers. I probably got involved because, you know, he says you're going to make people mad, you're going to upset people, you're going to upset family members. But being a lawyer for 50 years, I've upset a lot of people. And there's always two sides. So I was making one half happy and the other half upset and hurt and mad. And I always have to be careful when I meet somebody in a grocery store here in Winston or something, they sort of look at me and I say, well, I'm trying to analyze those eyes and see if I was on their side or the other side. And but you know, this is a great city, and we got a lot of great people. And this guy was in the newspaper business, and that's another business that sometimes upsets people. And as I say, this business of memoir, though, I got to say, I went off and lived in Chicago for a while. I went to law school up there, and I had to make a big decision about coming back to Winston. And I think one of the reasons I decided was because my family had started building up roots. My mother was an old family here, but my father had come to town as a newcomer. So I grew up with this sort of dialogue and conflict between the old school and the new school, and that really sort of set the pace for me. But when I came back here in Chicago, I realized that I was going to have a practice and get to meet so many more people than my friends in law school that were specializing in some very erudite area of the law, and it took them 10 years to get to meet a client because they were all doing research. You come back to Winston-Salem, when I came back in the 60s, the person would hand you a file and you'd go to the courthouse and try a serious case right off the bat. I mean, you really got thrown in there. And so what that leads to is that as I got a little older, I got to thinking, you know, I don't know much about my parents and grandparents, what they really thought about things. And so I wanted to leave a record of some kind. As he said, you don't necessarily have to write. Fortunately, I was able to finally slow down and being a lawyer, and it was an opportunity to try to make, you know, some stories, write some stories, memoirs, which are, you know, got to be as true as possible, but obviously you're telling your side of it, and as long as people understand that, sometimes you have to shift over to fiction if you're not sure about your facts, because you have to be careful. There are a lot of legal issues we might talk about later on that. But I've found that, especially up in New York State, when I read stories about Winston-Salem, they just go crazy. And I thought, well, maybe there's something really good about this that I really hadn't thought about. Because most of them live in a huge city where everybody's so anonymous that they don't have that personal conflict and personal relationships and problems that are sort of people-sized. We're not so big that, you know, we can't get a handle on some of these things that come up that in the big cities become a crisis. And we've had crises around here.
Well, that sort of leads us to the question of that someone in the audience or someone who sees this later might ask, which is, why should I write a memoir? You know, I mean, or they might have the question, they might be sort of self-deprecating and say, you know, why would anyone want to bother to read anything I would write? So, you know, why should people even get in the business of writing memoir? You had a need to tell some stories, but Al, what, you know, in your workshops, what do you tell people?
Well, what I tell them is that they have a lot more stories than they realize.
Go ahead and keep the mic real close to your
Okay, what I tell them is that they have a lot more stories that they need to share. They don't realize, people don't realize how many great stories they have. Every family has its own set of stories. I would run into people who would use phrases I'd never heard before. There's a guy from Oklahoma who said, "Well, that story will put a kick in your colt." I've never heard that saying, put a kick in your colt. But he was from the Midwest. And somebody else said, well, something done happened to Orly. You ever heard that? Something done happened to Orly? That's an old Southern saying, apparently came out of Thomasville, North Carolina. And so you start hearing these stories, and you say, why don't you write them down? Well, I can't write it. And then you say, yes, you can. You can write it. If you can tell it, you can write it. And so the thing that I found triggers them that works in most cases, not always, and works in most cases, is to take a set of index cards, plain old index cards, just like this, cheap ones. They don't have to be different colors, because you really got fancy. And start with the characters, like you're writing a play or a movie script, who are the characters in your story? Don't tell me a story about it. Write the name of that character on this card and put it aside. And do another character and put it aside. And then I say, now, think about places. It could be a city, it could be Winston-Salem. In most cases, it is Winston-Salem. Think about a place in your home and put it on a card. And you're not telling the story yet, but it's amazing how that triggers. We all have these triggers, these memory triggers that go way back. Sometimes it's a song, you know that. You hear a song, you say, yeah, I remember that song. Sometimes it's a photo, so forth. So you've got to get them started. You've got to get past this barrier of, I'm not aware. So that's how you get them started.
Cheryl, talk a little bit about why, what you would say to someone if they said, well, I don't have anything worth reading. You know, my memories are just my memories. They aren't worthwhile. Who would care about them?
Well, first I would tell them that it's more than your memories, because the people that you know, even if you do it for them, to sort of record. When I was doing my book, what I wanted people to see is that ordinary people make up history. The things that you do in everyday life, that's history. It's important and it deserves to be recorded. And I'll give you the example of the musicians. I did a piece on musicians. And, excuse me, no, this was the piece on artists. And my pastor said, Shirley, I got to tell you this. I saw this young man, and I said, I know you. And he said, yeah, you probably know me because I'm on page 23 of Shirley Harris' book. That was important to him. And you do something for other people. You elevate other people. Writing is not just about you, what you get out of it, but it's about what you can give to other people.
That's a great answer.
I think one of the things that is helpful if you get into this, of course I'm a lawyer and I'm used to sitting there with a legal pad, and they say, you know, if you really, back in the old days before computers and all that other stuff, a good lawyer could always get a legal pad and go over here to law school. We were lucky to have Wake Forest Law School here, and spend a weekend and figure out about anything you needed to know if you had a legal problem. And that was just kind of the test of a really good lawyer. It's, like I say, you had to work day and night with a legal pad and making notes and pulling the books out of the shelf. And that's all changed. It'll have to be a whole new revolution in the way, you know, with the computers. I go to the law school now at Wake Forest, and I'm the only one reading the books. And there's still all those books over there, but now it's all online.
Well, back to our topic, though.
Okay. Well, yeah. On the topic, I want to just read real short. Kind of the first one that I started on that got produced in the book here. It's an unusual story, and this is something I heard from my parents. It's such an unusual story. I thought I'd read it. It's called "About a New Home and a Child on Arbor Road, 1937." It says, white boy born at the bottom of Arbor Road Hill in an unfinished home. He sleeps in the front sewing room next to parents' bedroom. A 35 Packard and a Model A Ford collide at midnight on the hill. The father picks up baby boy who is imitating the siren. Father is a practical man. Father wants mother to go with him to Denver Convention. Mother never been out of North Carolina. Father decides to leave child with the maid's family on East 3rd Street. Grandmother shocked at father's maid plan. Father is a practical man. Mother frets and cries, but leaves. White child blooms in the Negro home. Father and mother bring home a black stone and a white stone from the Continental Divide in Colorado to place in the unfinished front porch. Stone still there. My father was a practical man.
And you know, that's great because there's a lot of very specific detail in that. And that's something I wanted to get thoughts of the panelists on. Now, tell me a little bit about how a memoir writer can improve the recall of memories, so that they have these details that really bring a story to life.
Wow.
Right, and Al, I'm going to tell you, point the mic at your
Okay,
lips.
that's a tough question. Is that better? Okay.
Yeah, just
Swallow the microphone. Yeah.
just don't do this thing. You can't gesture with it. You got to keep it next to you.
Wait, I got to keep my hand.
Well, then put it in your other hand and
Okay.
gesture with your right.
There you go. You know, I'll try.
Okay.
Okay. Obviously, the one answer is the old file of photographs, the files that somebody forgot to put names on or dates, the old prints, but they bring back memories, and they sometimes trigger things. The old letters, the old family records. But I think, I think we need to be thinking more about the setting in which we have lived. Winston-Salem. I think more, a lot of people just focus on their own families, and that's important. I'm not saying it's not. But this culture in which we live has changed so dramatically in Winston-Salem over the years. I came here first in 1956 or something, okay? And worked for that newspaper that you did work for a while. Back when it was a good newspaper.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
And the Winston-Salem in the 1950s and 1960s was nothing like it is today. It was a very, very separated community. Very separated, not just in terms of race, but in terms of culture, in terms of money. There was a few family members who ran the town. They did. And that was the way it was back then. But I mean, they ran it to good purposes. I'm not saying that their culture was evil. It wasn't, but it was what it was. Now all that's changed. A lot of it's credited to Western Electric, who came in here, and all of a sudden it wasn't just Haynes and Reynolds. It was an industrial company in technology. And that brought in a lot of middle class engineers and types of that type that changed our community. So I think when we think about writing memoir, we ought to very much try to associate it with site, with location, and with time. What happened during that period of time was important. I made the mistake of running for the Board of Education in 1968. Yeah, I know, a long time ago. I think my wife put me up to it. Never forgiven her for it. And I very quickly learned by actually visiting schools that there was no such thing as separate but equal. Okay? It was called separate but equal, but it was not equal. The textbooks that were used in the white schools were handed down when they were worn out to African American schools. That was separate but not equal. And you know, all that happened throughout in the 60s and 70s. So all I'm saying, I guess I'm not answering your question well, but I want us, in writing memoirs, I want us to focus on the city of Winston-Salem, on its culture, on how it's changed us, and how we've changed it.
Well, Cheryl, what other kinds of resources, because I'm sure you had to do a fair amount of research with your book. Talk about other resources and tools that a memoir writer might employ to try to flesh out some details or jog their memory.
Well, of course, I used photographs, and mainly because I'm a visual person. And when you get with people and you're sort of flipping through photographs, Winston-Salem Chronicle, they gave me access to all of their photos. So, to tell you the truth, some of the photographs shaped the book because that wasn't the direction I was going in some cases. But because there are so many great photos and so many stories to put together from those photos, that was something that jarred my memory. And I guess that was just one instance. Of course, when you talk to people, and you're telling them one story, they may take you down another way, so you want to engage people. Now, I didn't do a lot of that because this was a personal journey for me, and I wanted it to sort of be about my memories, but people did share with me theirs and some ideas about the way that they thought that it should go. But I took it was personal, but talking to other people will jar things and make me think about other instances or other things that should be included in the book.
I want to ask you a very specific question, Bill. And that is, and I just thought of this just now as I was talking about the technology shift, and we've all seen it. And one thing I'm keenly aware of because of the documentaries I've researched is that the newspaper of record is gone. You know, you can't go to the Journal today and find out everything that happened, everyone who was arrested, everything the city council did last night. We don't write letters anymore. We write emails. You can go to the UNC library and all of Gordon Haynes' letters are archived there. But what about, now we're in an email culture, and it's very different, and I fear for what it's doing for future historians. But it also applies to folks like you all that write memoirs and might want to, look at grandma's letters to her daughter during the war or whatever. Pick your example. So how do we deal with that?
Well, the way I deal with it is I make copies of stuff that I think is worth preserving when I send out letters or receive letters. And you'd be surprised. You can separate the wheat from the chaff pretty easily. And I think it's kind of important because you're right. This stuff, you got to hit the delete button, it fills up. You got to get rid of the stuff. I understand they're experts can even get the deleted material if you get into a legal case. But I think the main thing is that everybody has some obligation not only to try to get these stories from your parents, your grandparents, particularly people that are still alive. And also, I think one of the things I haven't done as much as I wanted to do, and I'm still trying to do, is make contact with old teachers, people that are still alive. And the two reasons for that. One is to get the information they have, and they will tell you things about you that you never knew. Some of it's nice, and some of it's not so nice, but it's good for you. And it's time goes by so fast, we forget about that. Occasionally, I remember over the last 10 or 20 years, I'd run into some old teacher, especially coaches, and I still have two of my coaches from Reynolds High School that are still alive. And I go to the gym, and at least once a week, I meet one of the football coaches. And then I spend at least 15, 20 minutes just talking to him. And they love to talk about things, and they know a lot of stuff and remember. And they'll tell you things about yourself. And these opportunities, as Cheryl pointed out, are social life. I mean, we sort of get in our little groove. And one of the great things about being retired is having a little more time just to try to hang around and talk to some people that you never had time for when you were busy working under stress and busy suing people. I just remembered Al Perry over here, just to show you what a town this size. You live in Chicago, you never know people you sue, but I'd bring a lot of cases against the school board. He was on the school board. And I'm surprised, yet he's sitting here laughing, we're getting along okay. But that's a part of being an American. I mean, Americans disagree, and sometimes we argue about it. Sometimes you have to go to a court, and these things happen. And I think it's quite significant, at least in Winston-Salem, that I saw Bill Womble back there before. I had one of my first cases involving teachers was involving Bill Womble when he was representing the school board. And yet, I go to the same church with him. I mean, this town is sort of interesting that way. A lot of people end up having to be on different sides of the issue, and I think that's very healthy. And in most towns, once they get to a certain size, everybody's an enemy, and they can't even talk to each other or anything else. So
now you look like you're chomping at the bit.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to respond to being sued by Bill, but I want to mention technology. I think the technology today is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because we have incredible ways to preserve our memories, photographs, recordings, you name it. The curse is that a lot of that is not noted, annotated. I mean, people with these cameras, phones, they're going around taking pictures. They're not storing them in a way that they may be dated. There may be a date engraved on that, or printed on that little chip, whatever it is. But I think a lot of people are collecting a lot of data that they'll never be able to use, and that's what I worry about.
So what's the solution?
Do away with technology.
Become a Luddite.
Become a Luddite. Go back to the good old days. No, I think that we need ways to impress people that they have a lot of valuable things a lot of valuable memories recorded, and that they need to annotate them. They need to list them. They need to use files, like build a legal pads or whatever you want to use to make records of these things. Now, I'm guilty as anybody else. I've got tons and tons of 35 millimeter slides and prints, and a few of them are noted, but a lot aren't. And there's a lot on my computer now that have never been actually listed or detailed.
So Cheryl, if we have new technology is what it is. There's this beast called Facebook and social media that is kind of where public discourse seems to be headed. So how do you put social media on your side in terms of being a memoirist?
Well, I learned a lot about what's happening with my friends on Facebook. So I think that it can be used, I think it could be valuable because, like you said, they aren't annotating anything, but historians can use that medium to annotate. There are a lot of pictures that are also posted on Facebook as well as the stories. So I would use it to my advantage and to just pull what was needed and maybe even just to check with someone, because I remember liking, everybody familiar with Facebook, that this guy put this old picture on there and I liked it immediately and messaged him as to how I could get a copy of it. So it's what do you call it? It's a beast, but it's the good beast, the good monster. Yeah, a blessing and a curse. So I would say to embrace social media and use it the way you can.
Bill, could you use social media to build an audience for what you write?
Yeah, I think you probably could. A lot of people
Tell me about your Facebook page. You got a Facebook page?
No. Not interested in the Facebook page. In fact, I'm not really interested in publishing. I'm just trying to leave a lot of material that I didn't have from my grandparents and parents, and just something in the family. And maybe someday somebody can use it. But you know, the Facebook, I will tell you, the public information now, the mass media. I was probably one of the first lawyers because I was representing a lot of employees against their company or their employer. Occasionally I'd have a client come in and they made a recording of this exit interview or whatever the employer had said to them before they left. And you know, they thought this was really the hottest thing in the world, but I can tell you, most employers are pretty smart about what they say to an employee, because I think they suspected maybe 15, 20 years ago that they might have a recording device on or something like that. And so I think sometimes this stuff is, but we see now it's still going on the telephone, and apparently it doesn't matter whether it's illegal. It's illegal. The recent one that came out in the mass media, you're supposed to have permission of both parties on the phone, but it doesn't seem to matter. If it's important enough, the media will run with it. But as far as what the memoirist and how you deal with that, I mean, I think you want as much information as possible, but you know, a memoir is not like something has to be proven in court or scientifically. A memoir is a recollection of a personal event. In other words, the person writing it, it's not hearsay. They should be aware that the thing is happening. Now, in my case, where how I was born and what my parents did, I just heard that from them. But I did get some confirmation, of course, my brother and sister who were older, who were quite familiar with it. But that, as I say, that's the only thing you can rely on. But as far as the person that writes it, you see, memoir is, there's a lot of memoirists who are shifting over to fiction or to other areas of writing. The essay, for example. You know, the whole, we're in quite a flux about memoirs now to get into the legal issues. But anyway, as I say, I'm just operating at a level that I like because I love this city, and I'm trying to write mostly about things that happen in this city, and that's why I love this new museum we have here.
So pass it to Al, please. Good, absolutely.
Sorry. I just thought about a book that a couple of friends of mine did. It's called Text Talk. And what they did was they would send texts encouraging scriptures. So it became a Christian book, and a Christian book publisher published the book. But what they did was compile all of their text messages into a devotional. So, you know, I think that we should think outside of the box when it comes to memoirs.
Love it.
That's a really good point, really good point. Speaking of books, there's one book that I would like to recommend to you if you're interested in writing a memoir. It's written by a guy named Bill Rohrbach, R-O-O-R-B-A-C-H. I don't know him, so I'm not, and I have no financial interest in this book. But the name of the book is Writing Life Stories. It was published by the Story Press in 1998, and I'm sure it's still available on Amazon or your local bookstore. Of all the books I have read about the art and craft of writing memoir or life stories, or family stories, this is by far the best because it is so straightforward and simple. It's not academic. Pardon me for those of you who are academicians, but it's not the academic language that you see so many times in some of these books. It's very straightforward and common sense, and I recommend it highly.
Well, while you have the mic, talk a little bit about what, in your set classes that you teach, your writing workshops, what you tell your students about how they build an audience for what they write.
Okay, that's a big question because unfortunately, well maybe it's not unfortunate, but in many writing workshops, the participants include a number of people who primarily are there because they'd like to be famous and rich. Okay? Okay. I'm not either. So, you know, but what I'm trying to lead them into is write the story. Get the stories out. You've got great stories, so get them on paper or get them recorded if you're not going to put them in paper. And worry about the market later. Get it done. I don't care what the experts say, quality still counts in publishing. It really does. Well, that and a big famous name if you're, you know, some famous guy that got in trouble or something. Or writing a memoir called, what was that? 100 Little Pieces or 1,000 Pieces? That guy that wrote the fake memoir, remember him? Yeah. He made money because he got an Oprah twice. Once to apologize, and once to brag about his book, and then to apologize for all being a lie. His last name was Fry, I think.
Okay. Well,
I got off track.
I guess the bigger issue that comes in, you know, is there a longer shelf life for your memoir? You know, somehow in a family or, and this is for anybody to talk about, or an institution, or a library, or a university. You know, where could a memoir maybe find a home where it would do some good down the road?
Well, one great example of that is right here in town called Storyline. I assume they're still active. Storyline was a project of, yes, of course, of the Echo Council. And it's an amazing program that goes around with a bus recording people's stories. Now, I don't know what the archives are like that, or whether any of that's been published in terms of written form.
All of the library, archived.
Yeah,
all of them are archived in the library.
Library of Congress, really.
All right, we're going to go off script here. Talk about Storyline.
Just very briefly, if some of you don't know about it, it started about 5 years ago, actually, and we turned an old bookmobile into a state-of-the-art recording studio with the generous help of Spec Co. and some other people in town, trained a bunch of volunteers to be facilitators, and then we started collecting our community stories. And the whole idea was that we thought it was time that we started to understand who we are as a community in all our diversity and all of our differences, but that we would use the power of stories to understand that we actually are all connected to each other in some way, this human connection. If you hear a story of another person who would be very, very different from you, but there might be something in that story that you feel connected to. So we started gathering all these stories. People, then they came in with friends or family members into the bus. There was someone there to get them started and to operate the equipment. They talked for about 45 minutes, often about whatever they wanted to talk about, sharing their family stories, interesting things that had happened to them, things about the city. And then at the end, we gave them a CD for their own free CD of this 45-minute recording. And then they're all archived down in the library. But all of our radio stations, we take some of those stories and edit them into little 3-minute segments and play them on our radio stations. So, and we have the website that you can go and listen to them. So it is still operating, and we encourage all of you to think about recording your story in that way. And it's a good way to get started, I think, in thinking about what you might want to either record yourself in a more comprehensive way or write. This would be a great way to get started.
That's great. Catherine's probably frowning on me because we're taping this and all of that was off camera. But anyway.
That's okay. I'll put a photo of Gail up there.
All right, I'm passing the mic to Bill. Bill, I want you to talk a little bit, kind of build on what Cheryl? Gail. I have a mind like a steel trap, I'll tell you that. I want to build on something Gail said about something might resonate with the readers. How do you structure a memoir with some details so that it becomes relevant or to a wider audience, to a person who doesn't know you or your family, or so they can relate to something you're writing about?
I think one thing, and I learned this from being involved with poetry groups. Poetry groups, they consider, of course, it's very different, they say, from memoir and other things. But basically, the fun of poetry is it's shorter, and you're trying to get a sort of a musical feel, you're trying to get a little bit of flow of what you're writing. And what you can do is kind of let yourself go. In other words, you just explore, of course, and also you aren't bound by the rules of this actually happened, or I remember this, or anything else. You just let your mind run free. And some people say, well, that sounds like psychotherapy or something like that. Well, it is very similar in the point that you just let yourself run free. And that means the full part of your mind and start writing, and you just get it out. But I think what goes along with what she's talking about, we've got, I think, all oral history projects going on throughout North Carolina. There's one at Chapel Hill at the Love Hutchins House. It's a house down there that started. Skip Gates came to Chapel Hill, and I was there when he spoke. And they're trying to create a new, because the Love family was famous for denying, they closed down the university rather than at the end of the Civil War for a long time. And yet on the other hand, they were very good on the feminine issue. And then the Hutchins came along, and so they pulled together these various power groups in North Carolina to create a wonderful house down there with programs on oral history of North Carolina and all the things that have gone on, and throughout the South. It's called the Southern Oral History Project, and it's a big movement in Chapel Hill. One of the points, we did that here, people were trying to get this new museum started about 5 or 10 years ago. We interviewed some people, and I think they've got some of these interviews on the screens here. I noticed some of the people we were talking about interviewing and trying to get both sides of the story in all these interviews. I think that this museum has done a good job of that. But going back to how, the writing technique, I'm kind of a different believer. I don't think you're going to go to a workshop and you're going to get some rules that are going to make you into a writer. To really write something down, I think you have to be, understand something very old-fashioned. Any story you tell has got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you just have to sort of get a feel for that, and you take off and let it develop. I'm more of a sort of I think you have to let you sort of get a little germ of an idea, and you just got to run with it and learn to start writing that way. You'll find things inside yourself you didn't even think about if you really do that. And it sounds a little unorthodox, but I still think that the best writing sometimes is when you just let yourself go. You talk to, in fact, some of the really outstanding writers will admit that's right. The thing, it takes off once you get a character or you find somebody that's interesting, and you just let the thing develop. But anyway, that's
Thanks for that. So sure. Now I want to circle back to something you said, kind of might have been in your beginning statement. You talked a little bit about sometimes there are subjects that can be painful personally to the writer. Maybe it's a painful episode in their own life, or maybe it's something that's going to hurt feelings of a family member. That's sort of one of the landmines in writing memoirs. So Would you talk a little bit about how you handle those sorts of issues?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I made a note about that because you mentioned something along that line in the initial set of questions. I personally apply 3 tests. One is the risk-reward test. How much do I gain by including that episode in a memoir, and how much do I risk losing? Okay, risk-reward. Then there's the truth test. Okay, it's amazing how many memoirs really are not truthful. I'm not talking about deliberate falsehood, but everybody's perception of memory is different. I think one of the greatest things I've read recently was said by President Jimmy Carter, who wrote a book with his wife Rosalind, and he said it almost destroyed their 40-year-old marriage because they remembered everything differently, and they remembered the effect of everything differently. And they ended up writing vituperative notes to each other on their word processors. And their editor finally said, I don't want to hear these separate things. You just put a J or an R after that paragraph, so I know who wrote it. And the final test is the slander and libel test. Okay? You know, Bill would know more about slander and libel, but you can get sued for things you write in a memoir. If in some way you damage somebody's reputation, they can prove monetary loss because of that. So I don't think that's a big deal. I really don't. I think most people write memoir, and keep in mind that a memoir to me really has to have a relation. It's not an autobiography. It's not a biography. A memoir generally has to have an attachment to an event or a situation or a location. You know, and that can be a family memoir or set of family memoirs, but it really, a memoir is not just an autobiography. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, keep going though. It's good stuff.
Okay, well, no, I'll just add one more thing. And that is this great quote by Irvin S. Cobb. A good storyteller is a person who has a good memory and hopes other people don't.
Cheryl, when we sort of met Saturday to make sure we had our ducks in a row for tonight, you mentioned something about lots of folks are hesitant to talk about things candidly, or they won't out of a sense of loyalty to an employer or to a family member. They don't want to hurt someone's feelings, or it's not seemly to talk about something like that. How do you deal with that? How do you overcome that?
Well, that's going to be a good question that I'll let you know when I find the answer. There's a piece that I'm thinking about doing, a memoir, and I probably have a question for you. And I'll start by asking you this question. The memoir, you said it's centered around an event, but it's my aunt's memories, although I was a part of it. So I want to write this memoir. My aunt was a domestic worker, and there are a lot of stories. My mother was a domestic worker. My grandmother was a domestic worker. They've been in a lot of homes in the city. There are a lot of stories to tell about segregation and race that some of them don't want to share, and the sense of loyalty, they don't want to do it. And I think some of the people that worked at Evernote may have been betrayed by some writers also, so there's this betrayal thing. But I want to do it, and I want to tell the story of the domestics and pull it from the sense of when you think about enslaved people, and I don't think about slaves, think about people who were domestic workers who were enslaved. But I want to go back that far. I guess I'm asking you a question now.
Okay.
I want to do a memoir that's based on somebody else's memories.
Okay. That's a great question. It really is. And I immediately thought of the book and the film called The Help. Maybe some of you may remember that. One way to approach that is to change the names and change the descriptions of some of the people. You're writing about real people and real incidents, but you change their locations, you change their names, and so forth and so on. So you add an element of fiction. You've got to be very careful, particularly in that subject, because you can hurt people that you don't want to hurt. People whose stories are important, but they don't want them told. So in most cases, I would think, and I'm not really qualified to talk about that, but to me, it seems that permission becomes an extremely important thing. Find people who are willing to share their stories, which you think should be shared with the general public, and encourage them to come forward with their stories. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think what I want to come out of this memoir is the strength of people who were there, and not, I guess, so much what happened, but the strength and how people sort of came in and did it.
Yeah, I think you need to be able to articulate a compelling reason why it's important that they share their memory. But you talked about hurting people, and I want to get back to something you touched on, and I think as our resident lawyer, Bill should answer this question. You talked a little bit, Al, about people being able to be sued for slander or libel. Talk about the legal issues and the legal landmines that are out there for a memoirist who is telling it like it is.
Well, you're going to figure out why so many memoirs are about people in the past that aren't with us anymore. That's the safest way. Yeah, when people are no longer alive, you don't have the problem about suing for the damage to them. You might think, well, why not? They still have a reputation. But that is one reason a lot of memoirs, and a lot of the stuff I write is about stuff that's happened a long time ago. None of the people are with us anymore. But really, I think it's sometimes overemphasized, but it is the threat of a slander is with words, and libel is when you do it in writing, so we'd be dealing with libel. And of course it's based on the fact that you injure a person with a falsehood. So they got to prove it's false, and that you knew it was false, and that, or you don't even have to know it's false unless it's a political figure. That's a whole other area. That you can say more things about a public figure than you can about a regular person who's not known either in politics or being a public person. But otherwise, it's just a pretty simple rule. I mean, the question is, you can say something to people, like if you go to court and have to testify, there are all kinds of things you can say about people if there's a reason you have to say it. But a writer, he's not protected by that. So if you tell a falsehood, if you use a falsehood, false information, you're subject to lawsuits. The lawyers vent all these memoirs that have been written. And there have been lawsuits. Most of them are settled. You don't hear about many, but going back to the 1960s, the first $1 million verdict in this country was a man brought a case against a writer who said he was a communist. And he got over $1 million because he wasn't a communist. It was a falsehood. Everybody thought he was. Maybe he talked like one or acted like one, but he wasn't actually a member of the Communist Party. But that's interesting to show the first $1 million verdict. You think it'd be somebody that lost 2 legs or arm or all kind of things. But actually, that's kind of the amazing thing. The trial lawyers say, we've come a long way since when we could get $1 million was be accused of being a communist. But that shows you how falsehood can damage a person's reputation. And back in the day, during the Cold War, you could lose your job. A lot of bad things could happen to you if you were a professor or anything else.
At one time, the chairman of the local Republican Party called me a communist, but unfortunately, he didn't do it in public.
I'd like to, Catherine, I don't know if we're allowed to do this, but I think it'd be nice if we could take some questions if there are any from the audience.
You're allowed and encouraged.
Is that a good thing? Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask our panelists? Raise your hand.
I wanted to ask.
I'm going to repeat the question.
Where do you get your pictures? What do you have an archive that you use for your book?
Question for Cheryl is, where did she get her pictures from, and is there an archive?
I use the public library, digital foresight. I use the Chronicle, the journal. It was hard using the journal, but that's okay. And families gave me pictures as well. And there were some pictures that I knew that I wanted, so I just went and approached the individuals.
Any other question over there? Yes, sir.
As a writer, don't you have the responsibility to tell, if it's your memoir, don't you have responsibility to tell exactly that comes from your viewpoint, what your worldview is? And there may be some collateral damage, but it may spark some possibility for wanting to have lawsuits over here, but how does that come close to you, and how does it affect you and your responsibility as being a true writer and being cathartic about how your true sense and their experiences are?
Well, I'll answer, then I'm going to pass it to Bill for the legal aspects of your question, because I think there is a legal aspect to it. If I were writing a memoir that dealt, for example, with some of the experiences I have had in Winston-Salem, particularly when I served on the Board of Education, I would have to be extremely careful, because it is possible that what I would write could consider to be damaging the career of somebody who was on that board with me, with whom I had severe disagreements. Okay? Now, and in that case, you're not necessarily, even if you're telling the truth, you can still be sued. You would have to prove that it's the truth, or the other side have to prove it's libelous, but I don't think you should. That doesn't automatically prevent you from writing things like that. It just means you've got to be much, much more careful about what you write. But you shouldn't let that stand in the way of what you consider to be an important truth. Okay? Bill?
Yeah. I think the thing you'd have to have is some sort of, you'd have to think about whether you could defend it. I mean, you can only write the interesting story, but you have to be prepared to defend it if somebody should challenge it. And of course, that would mean you would have to, and that's why memoirs usually do some research if they see that they may be affecting someone else. But of course, the short answer would be to just change the names and make it a fiction. But then people it's amazing, but people want to read memoir rather than fiction, because they think all fiction is fiction and all memoir is truth. And we know that's not so. A lot of the memoirs do have things in them that are not so. But the point is, fiction has a lot of truth in it, and that's why fiction still sells. At least they say that the women like fiction a lot. But it's because it tells ultimate truth. It doesn't maybe tell a scientific truth, but it reaches beyond that to some time. But of course, in a court of law, we got to deal with the real world out here, and that's why it is dangerous if you're going to take on a big issue and say something you're sure about. But somebody else could prove you're just wrong, and you made a false statement as far as that person is concerned. In your mind, you might not have meant to hurt anybody, but you're going to be responsible for anything you say. Like you drive a car down the road and you think you're on a two-way street, and you just made a mistake and got on a one-way street and you killed 4 or 5 people. That's pretty dangerous, and it's going to make you liable whether you didn't mean to do it or not. So it's a form of negligence there.
Other questions? Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, legally, can a person's family, a deceased person's family, come after one of us if we write something like, well, I wouldn't come out and say, he was a no good bastard or anything like that. But I mean, call him a scoundrel, list what he did, put it all out there, and feel like, or be able to find the facts that can back it up.
I think you have to show individual damage to that person. In other words, if the person that's no longer living, it wouldn't damage, like you say, you're saying, well, it could damage their reputation if you're getting ready to write a book or, some aspect of it, but you'd have to prove some sort of connection to keep something like that going, and that would have to be proved. But I think it'd be, as I say, there's nothing foolproof in the law anymore, and that's just like in memoirs. It depends on the details, whether the person's a public figure. That helps a lot to defend against someone, because public figures, their reputation goes on. I mean, like public figures.
Does the family have any legal standing though?
Well, not unless they can show they've got damage. I mean, that there's been some damage with this. But if it's a public figure, I don't think it's going anywhere.
Well, if it's not a public figure,
well, it would be.
What would they have?
Well, I don't know how you would show any damage. Well, I mean, it'd be harmful. I guess they'd maybe try to show some sort of emotional damage.
I wanted to add to that. If you go online and you Google about memoirs, you will get a lot of good information and so on. But one person said, well, they wrote their family history, they wrote their memoirs, and they said something about, Aunt Sue or so on, and then the other relative didn't like it. And their response was, well, write your own damn book. I wrote mine, but you can present the case to others. And I think if you are writing from the heart, and you're writing a family history and you want to share these what you view as true stories, then I'm not sure how much time you want to spend worrying about the legal aspects. That's my honest opinion, but I dropped out of law school a long time ago.
Right. No, but I think you're right. Most of the family memoirs, there have been very few lawsuits in that area because you can't prove it really made a difference. In fact, it might have increased somebody's economic chances. Most of those family memoirs, it makes the people mad. And I've read some stories about the fact that it helped them in a lot of ways because because people be too sensitive about something that the public thinks is, hey, that's really cool. I didn't know that person had such imagination and flair and all that kind of stuff. So, but there is a lot of hurt feelings. But thank God for the First Amendment. I mean, that people can say a lot of things, and that's just part of living in a free country. And sometimes I think we get a little, or maybe we're moving toward that in some areas where you just can't spout off something and figure, okay, it's not a big deal. A lot of people out here are making a big deal out of anything, and especially in families. They get in family feuds and create a lot of litigation. But I don't think most of that's successful.
All right, so we've been going for an hour, so I'm going to start wrapping this up with one more question. I encourage audience members, if you have more questions, to accost our panelists when we're done. Accost. Yeah. Well, those writer words, accost. But Bill, I want to start with you and then pass the mic down the table. I want to give you a chance to say something that you wanted to say tonight that I haven't asked about or you haven't had occasion to talk about. Is there anything that you wanted to get across that you haven't had a chance to say?
I got to say probably more than I should have said, but I do think that the legal aspects of it, and you read the papers and everything, would probably lead you to think there's a lot more litigation. I don't think there's very much litigation in the memoir field. And like I say, the ones that get into court over it are the people that think they're hurt or important, and it usually doesn't hurt them that much either. I mean, but I think the only thing I would say is that I try to tie my interest in memoirs to the fact that I grew up here and lived here and went to public schools here, and then I finished law school at the University of Chicago, and I really loved Chicago while I was living there. I even got used to that cold winter up there and the winds blowing all the time. But I'm glad I came back home because it's just hard to have roots in the big city. And most of the friends I had there at the University of Chicago were from Michigan or Wisconsin or somewhere, because it's really hard to dig down in a big city, and especially probably more today than when I was there. So I think we got to appreciate living in a town like Winston, just big enough to have all kinds of folks, and yet small enough to where I think gradually we're pulling together, and this museum is doing a big part of that. So I'm really happy to be here.
I would just encourage people to, pictures I think was just the way that I wanted to go initially to get started. And I knew it was a lot more. I would have people consider using pictorial as a way to start their memoir. And I would also suggest you contact Arcadia Publishing if that's something that you're interested in, because they do a lot of neighborhood books. And this kind of book can be around forever. It's timeless. And And I think it's a good way to capture the spirit of a city or of a community.
What is the name of your book?
My book is Winston-Salem's African American Legacy, and you get an opportunity to, in your, of course, introduction, I focused on cultural and the social history of African Americans.
We have copies of sale here?
There's copies.
Oh, there's copies.
Something that hasn't been mentioned, and I will throw it in. One of the things I run into in working with people who are writing or who have written their memoirs is their inability to edit their own work. And I think that this New York editor named Michael Korda put it really well. He said, "You know the part between page 18 and 92? Let's make it into one really good sentence." I think it is very difficult to stop writing and to go back and say, take this out. You don't want to take anything out, but you've got to make it concise, particularly in today's world. Everything seems to be quicker, shorter, faster. How many 900-page books have you read lately? One. Okay, good. Two. Okay.
750 to Goldfinch.
Okay.
Well, that sort of reminds me of that. That reminds me of that scene in A River Runs Through It where the father is teaching the older son how to write. And he has to write it, and he gives it back and says, "Do it again, shorter." And, 3 or 4. Yes, economy of words is something they teach in journalism. Anyhow, thank you very much for coming tonight. Let's give our panelists a big hand. I hope you all write a memoir and then stay out of court when you do it.
Thank y'all for being here. Thank you to all our guests.
I'm sorry. Listen, and we need Catherine needs the mic.
I'm just going to say thank you. Bill is going to hire you for our PR gig. So thank you so much. Please come back. Our oral histories are online on our website. And Marjorie Northrup right here is one of the stars of our oral history project. It talks about her life. Well, you speak very self-deprecatingly, appreciatingly. I don't know. Anyway, you speak, but the impact that you made in the civil rights movement in Winston-Salem, and that's so important. And there's so many great stories that we collected in our oral history project. And Storyline is great for that too. So, thank you all very much. Thank you.